Thank you, Wendy. In this webinar, I'll be focusing primarily on data analytics and Scrum. And this is not a very easy marriage because defining and pointing out the necessary data to produce metrics in the Agile world is quite an ambitious goal. And I guess that's because this webinar is made me one of the most exotic I've ever done. It deals with totally different worlds who each have their own rules and cultures, and yet it can also be a roadmap to one of the most valuable endeavors if we can bridge this gap. So I'll try to explain in this webinar the origins and reasons for the gap between data analytics for project management and Scrum, and I'll try to develop these problems further in a discussion on the differences between transaction processing and analytical processing application development, because these are completely different project types. And finally, I will describe a case in transaction application development and elaborate a bit on the approach to data analytics in projects for what I call classical business intelligence. So it's, as I said, two worlds. Then we'll go on with the Agile application development, have a check on Agile analytics, and do a couple of case studies. I hope I'm getting the next slide right now. Oops, page down. Yep, there we are. So let me remind you that Peter Drucker, one of the biggest management gurus ever, said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we're not just dealing with procedures and processes, we're dealing with culture. Because the Agile culture is human-centered, and it believes in self-organizing teams, which is far away from the division of work as proposed by Taylor or by Fayol, who said that there were people who executed, there were doers, and on the other hand, there were thinkers. Well, like in some IT projects where you have non-participating project managers who only need a spreadsheet with some numbers, instead of observing the process during the stand-ups, the retrospectives, and the backlog grooming sessions, which is, of course, quite typical for the Scrum culture. The Agile world is about facing the client. It's about responding to his requirements with pragmatic solutions and rapid solutions in short cycles of stories that yield a concrete functional aspect of the total solution. Now, to estimate these stories, that's a joint effort of analysts and developers together with the product owner, and each project has its own ecosystem. So the complexity of development may produce internal consistency, but this will by no means imply conformity with external and objective standards. If you use metrics from past projects, you may provide a rough benchmark for want of a better standard, but only if all the aspects of the project at hand are equal to the past, then you can have some benchmark. But think in terms of the same team composition, the same framework used, the same quality of analysis, etc., etc. You can't just have all these aspects equal and make a benchmark. So, in other words, the maturity of the team members, the group dynamics, the intrinsic motivation of key members, and even hygienic factors like a nice office space or flexible working hours, and last but not least, the client and the product owner, they will greatly influence the productivity of the team. And then there's something which I like to call estimation phobia. It's the fear of developers to address the project with an entrepreneurial spirit, to say stuff like, I don't control every aspect of this project, but I have the will to succeed. So I'll estimate this piece of work on XYZ dollars. No, on the other hand, developers try to reduce risk as much as possible. And when the project manager asks for commitments of time, quality, cost, and all the other tedious metrics that only PMs can be interested in, well, most of the time they get an answer that's basically, I'm a programmer, I want to build a perfect solution, and that's it. So at best you get overestimated efforts, and at worst you get social loafing or even fraud. So one thing is already clear. It's hard to find benchmarks for any metric produced in Agile projects, especially when story points express the relative complexity within the project. The only usable information that data analytics on a project can produce is validated on consistency within that specific project. So if you're tackling large development tracks with more than one Scrum team, the need for normalizing the value of these story points will become evident. So the teams will have to put some effort in adjusting their estimates to provide a transversal insight in the project's progress. We refer to the Scaled Agile framework for more on this. I can give you the link if you need it, but something like scaledagileFramework.com, you will find it on the internet. So the analytics world is more about creating one version of the facts, and you want to verify these facts using external sources if they're available, or you may reproduce the analysis on new data for validation, or you will exploit these facts to produce actionable information for decision makers. So in short, it's a benchmark and all the stuff that scares the hell out of a Scrum meeting. So mixing oil and water is not that simple. Now, is this the end of this webinar? No, I think there's hope. I've been involved in a couple of Agile projects for software development and a lot for business intelligence projects. And analytics have contributed to better project management decisions. But don't get your hopes too high. I can provide you with a few empirically based methods, and I realize very well that further improvement on this body of knowledge is needed. So don't expect very fancy statistics, let alone advanced analytics. So more of these known metrics are really descriptive stats like the burn down of sprints, the releases, the velocity, etc. But the examples are there in a few slides from now. So if you look at Agile and data analytics in OLTP and OLAP, then there's quite a difference between the two. So let me give you a little primer on the ICT development projects here. If you look at online transactional processing, it's about supporting business processes like selling and developing customer relationships, shipping goods, warehousing products, booking incoming and outgoing invoices, etc., etc. So it's typical for transaction processing that the database of each process supports transaction like using things like insert, update, read, and delete. And the object of each process is one. You have one client record at hand, you have one stock keeping unit at hand, etc. So, yeah, you can say that lists are also queries, but they remain within the scope of the transaction support system. If you list all clients with an order data before a certain date, or if you have to find stock keeping units with a warehouse entry date, that's not really business intelligence, that's a simple list in detail. On the other hand, online analytical processing applications, they are transversal in their approach. And that means that you have to combine data coming in from various business processes to come up with meaningful answers to business questions. So, to give you an example, who are my most valuable customers? If you need to answer that question, you have to get data from the CRM system, which is the customer relationship system. You have to get data from the production and warehouse management system, and of course also from the financial system. And with the coming of big data, or the introduction of big data in already many companies, and social media and other unstructured data from surveys, from call center interactions, from customer reviews, this will all add to the complexity of an online analytical process application. So for more on these two worlds, I recommend reading the words of Ralph Kimball, Bill Inman, and Dan Lindstedt as the champions of OLAP. And if you want to have some more knowledge on OLTP, I can advise you the principles of transactional processing from Philip Bernstein. So if you look at the OLTP world, there's a clear link between the requirements, the use cases, and the user stories. I mean, Agile software has been around for a while, and OLTP applications has been on for quite a while as well. And the both have been a good marriage in the past, and I think they will continue to be a good marriage. So if you look at a typical Jira board, you can have your link between your use case, between the requirements, and between the user stories, and of course also between the deliverables. So there's almost a one-on-one relationship between all these aspects of the development cycle. If you take a hotel case, for instance, you have very unequivocal, unambiguous requirements. The client needs